This is the song Minor Matt in Abbotsford was trying to mimic, emulate, imitate. Yeah, first time I heard it. So.
Yeah, I think most people know about my catalog and what my preferences in music is. So
yeah, if it's not Pearl Jam for me, I probably haven't heard it.
Yeah, if it's not hip hop, I probably don't know what you're talking about.
If it's not Tupac or Biggie.
I have more diverse.
That's mostly Tupac and Biggie though.
Sunreal is actually an artist from Vernon. He's a BC boy. He's kind of borderline hip hop and pop and whatever. But yeah, that's his really famous popular tune.
Golden era of rap was like 1989 to 1996, and that wasn't. So that's out of my listening habits, guys. I'm very one dimensional when it comes to my listenership.
All right, so there it is. We are now clued in, and yes, Minor Matt. We only listen to one type of music. Generally. Maybe that's a bit harsh. All right. So Canucks prospect camp is beginning on Friday, and it's kind of just the precursor for what is to come with the training camp starting next Thursday and then eventual Canucks games before we finally get to the regular season in mid-October. We're now right in the 1 month away gap for the start of the regular season, but there is a lot that's going to happen. And prospect camp for the Canucks ain't really what it used to be. This is a team that has moved away from the big, shiny prospects because a lot of them have graduated to the big club. Yet there is still one that is essentially the headliner. And this tweet coming in at Sportsnet650, little late submission for Not Saying, Just Saying, 5 Canuck thoughts. I'm not saying a rookie camp headliner Podkolzin will score 50 points this year. I'm just saying he's going to be in the top 6 regularly. And it is Podkolzin who is going to be the focus, I guess, of rookie camp as it opens on Friday and is the prized prospect of this Canucks roster right now.
He definitely is. It's, the talent that fell to them in the draft. We've been waiting and waiting for the KHL story to kind of conclude. Finally has. And, intrigued by this player, but what is he? What is he in camp? What is he in the NHL? You've heard a lot of glowing reviews from people overseas. You heard the comparisons that, hey, yeah, maybe the KHL game wasn't suited to him. He's more suited to that NHL game. You heard Travis Green talk about what he's expecting from the player as well. But until we see it with our own eyes, you want to get confirmation on that. And the videos coming out of UBC were nice. The only thing that established for me was that he's in Vancouver, right? Because it's essentially a practice. But having him play with the rest of the players, the rest of the prospects, he is the headliner. He is the player that is most intriguing because if he hits, I don't know if I believe in 50 points, but yes, he gives you that option of playing in that top 6. Most likely a third liner to begin, but he does give you that option because he has that high end. So by far, not even close, the most intriguing player at this year's prospect camp.
I don't think it's, you look at that prospect group, right? It's Podkolzin's the only real guy you look at there and say, okay, the ceiling is extraordinary. Like there is a ceiling there for this player that he could be a legitimate top 6 needle mover for you, right? There's really nobody else at that camp you look at and say, it's a needle-moving player. There are some projects. There's some
players that you're like, oh, I wonder what this guy is. But
maybe somebody can fulfill a role down the road or something. But there's nobody you look at and say, this guy is going to be integral to this team's future. It doesn't mean none of those players can become something like that down the road. But you're right. It's the one guy that you're looking at as Podkolzin.
They haven't had first-round picks in the last 2 years. Now, there's some intriguing players. Victor Persson has, kind of had some noise, made some noise in Sweden since the Canucks drafted him. I think what you look for now, because of where the Canucks are in their development, and especially after the trades to get Dickinson and to get Garland, the emergence of Höglander, what you expect of Vasily Podkolzin, Like, what are the Canucks looking for out of their prospects? They're kind of looking for role players, right? Somebody who will eventually, allow the Canucks to move on from Brandon Sutter at fourth line center. Give you more depth beyond Tyler Mott, who has been injury prone over the last couple of years. It's just a reality of the way that he plays, right? Where are you going to get third pairing defensemen on the cheap? I think that's kind of where the Canucks are what the Canucks are looking for. Obviously, you want to aim higher with prospects down the road, but for what this roster needs in the short to medium term, that's kind of what you're looking at. Where are we finding role players to graduate into this roster?
And the funny thing is, when you look at role players, right? Oftentimes, it's not a player that you get drafted in the 4th round, 5th round, or undrafted free agent that comes in and they developed into being role players. It's usually guys that come in with pedigree that find a way to become role players. They find a way to make a career in the National Hockey League.
Jason
right?
Dickinson,
exactly, late 1st round pick. Didn't quite pan out as a top 6 kind of player. Now he's found a career as a bottom 6 type of guy. And I think for the Canucks, as much as, I love to see Aidan McDonough down the road develop, and he has potential. Perhaps he can, right? And maybe one of those players the Canucks picked up, Victor Pearson potentially, a bit of a later round draft pick. Maybe he kind of develops. But at the end of the day, it's your top draft picks, your 1st and 2nd round players that usually develop into those role players down the road.
Yeah, and that's why Jet Wu is really intriguing for me when we talk about this prospect camp. Because, Vasily Podkolzin gives you the high-end talent. But Jet Wu, at the age of 21 now, he has that, part of a one season in the AHL with the Utica Comets as well. He's got an opportunity now to not necessarily make the team in the short term, no. But to your point, is there a player that can fit that role on the right-hand side, which is an organizational need now, and it will be in the future? We know how important right-shot defensemen are. This is a player that, if he can sort out, where he is and what his identity is in the pro game consistently enough, this is one of those players you're hoping for. Provides value. He can maybe play that right side and also, to a certain extent, solidify a third pairing or an extra defenseman. You want to see that eventually. I'm not saying that's going to happen tomorrow, but that's one player on this list of players, only 3 defensemen I should mention as well, that are at prospect camp. He's intriguing to me because there's nobody really else on that right-hand side. When we're talking about young players, he's a guy that could make even a small difference by adding some depth there if he finds that identity, right?
Well, and the funny thing, too, is he's going to get an opportunity. He have to. I mean, guys that play the right side, you got to see what you have in them. You have to, because if you don't, then, well, you got to go and find another player. Now, the Canucks have a lot of competition on that right side this year. It's with guys like Brady Keeper as well, who he's going to try to find a spot on this team with the Canucks, but may more likely kind of end up being on that Abbotsford team. But if you're a guy that can play the right side, you're going to get a chance. I mean, you got to give those guys a chance at some point because it's so hard to find those players. I mean, Pullman got $2.5 million for 5 years, right? A bunch of these other guys that play the right side. We were joking about Goodbranson got paid $2 million.
Cody Cece's making great money. Like, if you can
Well,
establish
he's
yourself
left.
in the NHL, even for a couple of years, you're going to get a payday. We got this one from Marcus and Gibson saying, Ric Flair's favorite Canucks, Jet, woo! Would love to see him develop into a long-term role player.
Yeah.
He's not even at Prospects Camp. Well, yes, he is. He is at Prospects Camp. He's one of the 3 defensemen, Alex Canuck, Liepert, Victor Persson, and Jet Wu as well. So it is interesting, and I think, getting to see some of these other players, we all know what Vasily Podkolzin is likely to be for this Canucks team, but what else are they getting out of some of these prospects? And I see a texter saying, they may not even have a 2020 draft pick that comes to the NHL. I mean, when you have as few draft picks as the Canucks have had the last couple of years, that's not shocking. Plus, they haven't had first-round picks. They didn't have a second-round pick last year, so that's more of a Jim Benning maybe being a little bit too frivolous with his picks and giving them out, but it's got to be they've got to find players elsewhere if they're not going to be getting them out of the draft.
Isn't that why, Danila Klimovich is so interesting this time around? Because he's 18. There's a long road there, but They did swing
touring
for
the city with Vasily and Nils.
Of course, he's getting the tourist treatment, but they swung for the fences with that pick, right? We've heard a lot of criticisms of how far this kid has to go, but there's also high-end potential there. I think part of the reason what you described there, Reach, is that's why they made this pick as well. Hey, maybe, you swing for the fences, you hope there's high-end talent there, and in the next couple of years, we'll figure out, what he is, but an initial look at him, I'm excited to look at him because there's been so much talk about what he is and what he isn't. I just want to see what this kid is on the ice.
Yeah, I mean, and like one of you guys mentioned, like he was a swing for the fences type of pick, right? I mean, that's what he was in that second round. I mean, could you have drafted somebody that maybe had a lower ceiling, but you felt could fill a role for you down the road? Potentially. But they drafted a guy because when you go through the list of players we just went through, there's a ton there, right? I mean, you look at high-end talent, there's Podkolzin. And like JD and Kokotlum says, texting into our Dunbar Lumber text inbox, 650-650, I was under the impression Klimovich has a higher ceiling than Podkolzin, lower floor, but higher ceiling. I'm not sure I'd go that far. And I think, okay, if you look at it from, he's a one-shot scorer potentially, and if he can score, say, 30-plus goals, yeah, that's a big, boon for the team. But I think people kind of downplay Podkolzin's upside. And I think that's what Five Canucks Thoughts was tweeting at there. Podkolzin can be a guy that scores 50 to 60 points. And if you are a big-time two-way player that grinds teams to a dust in the offensive zone and you keep the puck in that end and you get 60 points, that's a really good hockey player. Yeah. I'd rather have that than a imperfect 30-goal scorer, right? Because I look at that as being more valuable. So from a point production standpoint, Klimovich, higher ceiling than Podkolzin, potentially.
Yeah.
But I still look at Podkolzin with the overall value. That ceiling is still high. And I think we are somewhat sleeping on Podkolzin's potential. And I'm not saying Podkolzin is going to be a point-per-game guy or exceed expectations in that standpoint, but I do think some people are kind of sleeping on his upside offensively.
Well, I think people have maybe taken it as he doesn't have the same offensive potential as a Brock Besser, as you're almost downplaying his upside offensively. But maybe if you frame it like this, Mike, would you want Mike Hoffman on your team? Like, what's Mike Hoffman's value to you? And we saw last year teams were kind of balking at the idea of paying Mike Hoffman a significant amount of money.
And long-term commitments.
We know he can score. But there's questions about his defensive game and that. Montreal eventually, gave him a bit of a deal this year, and he's kind of looked at as their new Tyler Toffoli type of signing. But I've always looked at Mike Hoffman and say, I really like his game. I like what he can bring to a power play. But what else is he giving me? I want more than just a one-dimensional player. And that's what Podkolzin is to me. He's, okay, maybe his offensive potential isn't necessarily 30 goals on a regular basis, but he can give me so much more than just that. And to me, that's kind of what this Canucks team really needs, because they have the guys that are projected to be their top scorers.
With Podkolzin, yeah. And on the Hoffman front, though, to me, he's a luxury player in the sense that if you have room and you can get him on the cheap, I would definitely sign him. But is he a core member of any top six?
Well, okay,
right?
Look at it this way. How much did he sign for?
I think it was 5 and change.
Almost 5 and change.
Hoffman?
Hoffman, like 4 something?
I think he was in the 4s, yeah.
4 something, right? Would I rather have Mike Hoffman or Tanner Pearson? I'd rather have Mike Hoffman.
Yeah.
Right?
4.5 for 3 years.
4.5, right? And Pearson got, 3.2? Something around that? Like 3 point, yeah. So I'd rather have Hoffman than Pearson. So looking at this team, yeah, there's still room for a player like, Mike Hoffman, for instance. I mean, Pearson will be fine in a middle six role, or it's not like he's going to hurt you in that sense. But I still think there's room for that. But it's more about the overall upside and what you can provide. And I think we get so caught up in production and, hey, who scores and does this? Yeah, I love production, and there has to be a baseline. You can't be a top 6 guy and get less than 40 points.
No.
I mean, you can't just be that's just not going to be somebody you can look at. But if you can grind and you can provide a lot of two-way value and more value, I think that's high upside.
And this texter brings up a good point, unsigned, but who would you rather have, Laine or an O'Reilly type? I mean, look, Ryan O'Reilly, there's not a lot of those guys around.
No.
But this is,
Yeah.
Okay, who's got more offensive upside as a young player? Obviously, Laine, it's huge. We've seen it, the 40-plus goals, all of that. But what's been the knock on Laine the last couple of years?
Can he do it himself? Can he create his own shot? Can he drive play?
He's terrible 5-on-5 and has been defensively. We saw him before the trade to Columbus. He kind of had a little bit of a resurgence there in Winnipeg. His game started to come around, but last year was a disaster for Laine, to the point where Columbus, there was not a big time debate, but there's some question of do they give him the qualifying offer? What does a Patrick Laine new contract look like? Because it's okay, I know he can score me 30 goals a year, but he's legitimately hard to put on the ice at 5-on-5 because he's getting caved in so bad.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of, how the movement started to change in baseball, where it's okay, you can hit a lot of home runs, but what else are you doing?
Yeah.
Right? The hardest the hardest thing to do in baseball is hit home runs as a hitter.
Yeah.
The hardest thing to do in hockey is score goals, but there's more to the game than just doing that, right? And I think Laine is one of those players. It's he's kind of like Tarasenko in that sense, where it's he might score you 30, 40 goals, but what else is he doing? Is he making your team better? Now, Laine has potential. He has the ability. I can see him take that step and be an extremely dominant type of player. But, yeah, I'd rather have a guy who scores a little bit less as a better player. Tarasenko, you can't move Tarasenko because his contract's too big. He has injury issues. But if it was just about goals, he would have been traded by now.
Boys, even the greatest goal scorer of all time, in my opinion, Alexander Ovechkin, before Trotz got there were legit questions of, man, this guy scores a lot of goals. He's one of the greatest also even at that point. But Barry Trotz mentions that he sat down with Alexander Ovechkin and said, I need you to do more, right? So when the greatest goal scorer of all time is asked to do more, that's not a knock on a player. It's just saying, you got to give me more than scoring those goals. And, I understand in the basketball analogy, shooter's going to shoot. You're going to, the Carmelo Anthonys of the world are going to put up their jump shots and they're going to score, especially in his prime. But you have to do more than that. And when Ovechkin, who's scoring 50 a season, 40 a season, easy, and he's been asked to do more, I don't think it's something, the game has changed, right? Where you're going to have to be better defensively. You're going to have to diversify your game. And Patrick Laine is such an interesting case study right now.
Yeah.
Where does he go? Because he can't be the guy. In Winnipeg, he was helped out a lot. And Ehlers and him got along, depending on who they play with his Stastny. But when he went to Columbus, to your point, Reach, he got found out a little bit.
Yeah.
He couldn't create his own shot. He couldn't, teeing it up on the power play. He scored a lot of goals like that in his career. He has, and he will. But what else are you doing? You're going to have to add that layer to your game.
It's fascinating because, so we talked about Jason Dickinson off the top of the show and the flexible conversation, right? Mm-hmm. He can play center. He can play wing. Travis Green is going to have a lot of options. And you're starting to hear this a lot more around hockey circles. But it's something that across the major sports you're seeing more and more of, is that versatility. And I need you to give me more than just one thing. Sure, we can have a specialty as a guy who scores goals. He maybe posts up on the left half wall and we just use him for the one-timers, which is kind of where Steven Stamkos' game is starting to evolve with the Tampa Bay Lightning, because he's just not what he was as a younger player. It's essentially what Patrick Laine is. Yeah, I can shoot, but what else am I doing? But teams are prioritizing players that do a lot more and are versatile, can play center, can play the wing. And you see it in baseball. They were the first where they wanted players like Ben Zobrist who can play every position on the field, maybe outside of catcher. Mm-hmm. You see it in basketball, positionless basketball. We're going to go small ball here and really try to spread out the opposition's defense. Football, you're seeing it too. Prioritizing players that can play multiple positions, defensive backs, safeties that are kind of hybrid linebackers / defensive backs. Jamal Adams is kind of like that with the Seahawks. Mm-hmm. They want to use him as a pass rusher. They want to use him as a disruptor in the secondary. What's that look like in hockey? Because it's it's tough. When a forward gets stuck playing as a defenseman, we often see them get walked pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that move towards versatility look like in the game of hockey?
Well, I think we're already seeing it with the forwards, right? Playing
Yeah.
center, playing wing. The question is, how much does it evolve defensively, right? And I mean, we're not there yet, quite where a guy can play forward and defense unless you're a seventh defenseman that can play
Yeah.
forward and defense. And that's not really versatile. That's just, hey, we got a body that can do
Shouts
something.
to
for
Alex
us.
Biega.
Yeah. But I think you start looking at how the game's being played, too. I think a lot of coaches, and this is kind of what I think this coaching staff is trying to do and has been trying to do, is you got to be willing to amend your style of play from opponent to opponent or lull in a season and onward. Look at the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah.
What was the most impressive part of their postseason?
Defense.
Right. Especially how they shut things down against the Islanders, right? I mean, they were able to do that, and that's because they have a versatile roster. They have guys that can do different types of things. And I think that's the future of the league. The teams that have players that can do multiple things effectively are the ones that are going to be able to skirt injuries, right? You need depth, but you also need to have players that can do different things for you as well. Because, I mean, nobody has top 6 players as their 16th, 17th forward. Like,
Yeah.
nobody has, a third liner coming in as a 20th on their depth chart.
Yeah.
So who's going to be the guy that steps up if needed? It's got to be your third or fourth line guys that maybe if they can play a different spot, they can do something. And by that, we mean Podkolzin potentially, Jason Dickinson potentially. These are the types of players we look at and say, how much more can they do and how much better does that make your team?
Yeah, the positions are important too, but that Tampa example takes me back to Victor Hedman. You need to have special talent that can adjust on the fly. And most teams can't do that. Hockey's kind of set in there, hey, this guy plays with this guy on the back end, and if there's an injury, you adjust accordingly. But what Tampa's done is, no, we're going to dress, X amount of guys, and Victor Hedman throughout the playoffs, even in different, specific games, not maybe last year, but the year before especially, he would be playing with multiple partners. It was interchangeable, right? At some point, he's playing with pretty much every single defenseman on that back end, and that is something that you have that positionless aspect to it in the sense that you're not tied to one player. You're asking different guys to maybe do something different, but to me, when you have a player like that who can just keep it flexible, keep it, change on the fly, then all of a sudden, if your most important player is doing that, it's so much easier to put that across the lineup as well. You're dealing with egos in an NHL lineup, but once one of your leaders does that, the forward group, it's easy, interchangeable part. And we're seeing that more often now, right? Dickinson is the one you mentioned, but JT Miller is a classic example. It's been going on a couple years in Vancouver. When you need him next to Petey, it happens. If not, you can spread out the love, put him on the wing, on the third line. It is going to be the way of the future, but as far as defense, I remember Brad Richards playing the point in the power play. When he got caught, it was not pretty.
No.
Right? Like, you still have that element. Defensively, you don't still have that yet.
So to me, I think it's more players like Quinn and Cale Makar, who essentially are like rovers, right? They can be a fourth forward when you're pressing on offense.
They are a Carlson model, essentially.
Yeah, but these like Makar and Quinn almost they jump in more often than even Carlson did at times. So I think that's more of what it is, where those guys kind of become a hybrid fourth forward / defenseman when they're on the ice. And look, you're going to see it. More and more teams are going to be looking for their Cale Makar, their Quinn Hughes, their Adam Fox. And I think through the draft, we're going to start seeing more and more of those players starting to get developed. Because right now, those guys are they're so unique. There's only so few of them around the league. But I imagine we're going to start seeing more and more of those types of players coming through the NHL draft.
I see it as well. I mean, the way the game's evolving too, and I mean, players nowadays are so smart as well, right? They understand how the game is trending. They understand what needs to be done. I mean, look at Elias Pettersson. How mature has his game been for a young player? The thing that impressed us so much about Pettersson his first couple of years, last year was a disaster for everybody, was how well he played defensively and how well he understood the game and how he understood that you need to turn the defense into offense. And I think for defensemen as well, it's funny because I think they've been coached to be offensive, and some of that defending your own zone talent has kind of been lost a little bit the last little while. But it all comes down to how your overall team plays. And to Reach's point a bit earlier, you mentioned, you have guys that if they have to cover a defenseman, well, they might have issues.
Yeah.
But I think the game has to evolve to a point where guys can rotate and they can do those things without the rest of the team falling apart. And I think that's going to be the next evolution.
Well, when I mentioned Erik Karlsson, that's kind of like the 1.0, right?
Yeah.
He was a guy that was really, keen on jumping up into the rush, being offensive, but defensively, we knew his game was not where it needed to be. And even at the height of his career, won the Norris, put up points, but defensively, pretty shaky. Now, all of a sudden, you do have that commitment to defense. Even that first game that Quinn Hughes played against the Edmonton Oilers, gets walked by Leon Draisaitl. What happens in that second period? Makes that adjustment, and defense is a priority. Last year, obviously a blip on the radar, hopefully for Canucks fans. You hope Quinn comes back stronger defensively. But, Adam Fox is showing that you can have both. Guy was unbelievable last year. And if that's the model right now, that's something that should be replicated and probably will be. But you start wondering about those defensemen, especially when you see in the draft where, hey, really good offensively, defensively shaky. Those are the ones that you're basically saying, I'll take a flyer on this guy. I'll take a flyer on this guy because guess what? You can teach that defense. Offense, you're going to welcome that onto your team and hope you can develop a pretty decent defenseman.
Love the interaction on the Dunbar Lumber text line. We'll read some of those texts. And Mark Schofield's going to join us, QB analyst for Touchdown Wire USA Today, next on The People's Show, Sportsnet 650. Yeah, it's The People's Show. And lots of views still coming in on the Dunbar Lumber text line. Unsigned texter. Hey, dudes. The Canucks finished dead last in the division. Might want to check your spelling on some of this. I'm fixing it for you, though. Finished dead last in the division behind Ottawa, a team that you frequently mocked. Best down the middle? You are in Vancouver echo chamber. Canucks are no longer in the Canadian division. The Canadian division doesn't exist anymore.
I would also like to add that I picked the Ottawa Senators to finish 6th in the division last year. So, yes, I mocked them, but I also give them credit. They weren't last.
No, not dead last.
You didn't have the Canucks finishing.
That was the plot twist. I didn't expect that.
Nobody did, especially after how they performed in the bubble. But, yes, the Canucks were really bad last year. Also, they could still have one of the better groups of centermen in the Pacific Division. Both things can be true, is one of your favorite sayings, Sat.
Multiple things can be true at the same time. And also how big of a disaster this past season was and how embarrassing this past season was and how many players failed for the Canucks and how organizationally they let the team down. I mean,
I think some texters believe that we tried to paint a rosy picture of last season.
Derek agitated. It was the funniest. I find this hilarious. He's like, Sat, you never call out the Canucks. You're such a homer. And it's so funny because I get other people texting in and be like, you're way too critical or whatever. All I know is that people are going to say whatever they want to say. So I really don't care. Mm-hmm. But the reality is the truth is always complicated. And I think what people want to hear is their opinions just validated, right? They want to hear, they want you to say the things they're feeling. Even if they know it's not 100% true, they want to believe that it's true. And I'm not here to tell anybody what they want to hear. I'm not here to tell you what I believe, whether that's right or whether that's wrong. So it's one of those things, right?
Yeah, and that was one of those things where, I've been, called a homer, and at the same time, I've been called, Reach going back to last year, the most negative person on this station.
Yes.
So I'm not sure which one I am, guys. I need some help here.
Well, our next guest probably knows something about this. Whenever you're critical of a team, I'm sure that team's fan base comes after you and saying, "Oh, Mark, you're always chirping the Bills. What? Why are you always against the Bills for?" Mark Schofield, our guest here on the People's Show. It happens all the time, doesn't it, Mark, where you're critical of a team and people just jump on you for it?
It happens all the time. My favorite is when people accuse me of being a homer for, college football teams, and I have to remind people that, look, I played Division III college football in the States. I don't have a favorite college football team. If I do, it's Nebraska, but really you're going to call me a Nebraska homer? Okay. What's there to be proud about right now for Nebraska football? So, yeah, when I get those or, you're just a hater, you hate Michigan. No, I don't. Wesleyan University is 1-0 all time against Michigan because we played them once in 1889, and they never came back. So maybe I do have something against Michigan. How about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just surprised you didn't start talking about being a Patriots homer.
I mean, I see. The thing is, I admit to that. Like, I will openly write pieces where I'm just like I picked in our USA Today, predictions piece before the season started. I changed it at the end. I had the Dolphins get into the playoffs, but I switched it out. I put the Patriots in, and I said, look, this is an unabashedly homer selection. Like, I'm gonna not even apologize for it. I want to be able to go back to the Boston area over the holidays and see some old friends, and I have to be able to show my face. And if I don't make this selection, I might not be able to do that. So, I'll own up to it. But, I try not to be an unabashed homer, but every once in a while it seeps out.
Okay, let's stay on the Patriots for a second, though. Mac Jones, his debut, week 1. They end up taking the loss there, but what did you think of the rookie's game, Mark?
I thought he played well. I thought he did some things in that offense where you could see the sort of knowledge that he has of the system. He's already got a good, I don't want to say a mastery of the offense, but he's got a good feel for it. He was using his eyes, using ball fakes, little shoulder moves to manipulate defenders out of position. So he did some things I think were really good to see. There was a lot after the game. There were a lot of, former friends, current friends, family members saying, oh, he was checking everything down. He was so conservative. You rewatch the game, you rewatch it on the All-22, and he didn't have a lot of opportunities downfield. There wasn't a lot down there for him to target. It wasn't a situation where you have guys running free in the secondary. He's just not throwing it. Miami's defense is good. There was a play where, he had Jacoby Myers on a crossing route, and he thought he could put touch on it, a little air under it, and he has to learn that, not all his receivers are Jalen Waddle or Devonta Smith or John Michie who are going to run 4.3 or 4.2 at the combine. Like, those NFL guys in the secondary, they can close ground. And so he tries to put air under this throw. Jason McCourty breaks on it, breaks it up. It could have been a big play. It goes for an incompletion. That's something he'll have to learn. He'll have to, dial up the velocity there. But look, I think he played well, and he had that team on the 11-yard line going in down by 1 for a chance to at least kick a go-ahead field goal. And I think if you would have told Patriots fans, you will have the ball, 3 minutes left at their 11-yard line with a chance to kick the go-ahead field goal, how would you feel taking that? And they'd take it in a heartbeat. And so I think overall there was a lot of good stuff that Mac Jones did. There were some learning lessons for sure. But I think the biggest thing was after the game, he said we all have to get better. He put a lot on himself, saying I have to expect more from people. I have to be tougher on people. I have to expect more from myself. We saw the clip. He throws his first touchdown pass, doesn't want the football because he's like, the game's not over. We haven't won anything yet. He's endeared himself to Patriots fans already, both with his play, with how he's approaching life as a quarterback in the NFL.
So I know everybody's kind of talking about the rookie quarterbacks, but I want to go to a guy who was recently a rookie, coming off a big-time injury. It's Joe Burrow. And the thing I like about Burrow is he's kind of different from some of these other young hotshots, Mark, in that he doesn't necessarily have the same arm talent, arm strength that maybe we see some of these other young quarterbacks have. But I am still coming away really impressed with how he played in week 1 against Minnesota.
I was extremely impressed with how he played, too. And I think what might be most impressive about that is that play call in overtime, the 4th and 1, where Minnesota sells out on the run and he drops the throw to find out after the game that was his call. Mm-hmm. Jack Taylor believes enough in his young quarterback to give him the freedom at the line of scrimmage to say, look, get there, maybe make the call. It's that check with me moment. He checked to a pass play. He didn't like the look that they were getting from the defense. He thought he'd have an opportunity to make a big play in the passing game, and that's what he did. The fact that you have a second-year quarterback who missed a lot of last year with an injury, you're giving him the freedom to do that. I think that speaks volumes about Joe Burrow as a quarterback. What I was also perhaps more impressed with how beyond how he played, when he took to the podium after the game, right after his teammate Jamar Chase, and we just spent all summer hearing about Chase and drops and everything. Chase catches the touchdown. Joe Burrow sits down, and before anybody asks him a question, he says, I thought this guy was dropping everything. Just deadpan, threw it right back at everybody. And whatever you want to say about Joe Burrow, if you're Jamar Chase, if you're T. Higgins, if you're somebody else on that offense, to see your quarterback go to bat for his teammate like that, that's a leader. That's somebody that these guys are going to want to play for. These guys are going to want to follow. These guys they'll walk off a cliff for. And all the arm talent and the athleticism, yeah, that matters. But quarterback's also a leadership position. And Joe Burrow is demonstrating that too. So on the field, off the field, in the locker room, this was a very impressive week from Joe Burrow. I was so happy to see it because he's coming back from the injury. I was so excited about the way he started last year. I thought this was a great performance from him.
What do you make of Jameis?
I am all in. I am absolutely.
Let's go.
all
Let's
out.
do it.
And I was cautiously optimistic, and I remember talking to you guys about it and saying, look, he looked great against Jacksonville. It's great that he won the job. I want to see him, secondary reads under pressure. That, because everything he had in preseason, that game against Jacksonville where he looked great, it was all his first read, right? First read's open, I can throw the ball. A lot of quarterbacks can look good when that's the kind of situation you're playing in. But show me what happens when the pocket breaks down. Show me what happens when there's nothing there in the secondary. Show me what happens when you've got to work through pressure in the pocket and get to your second or third read. The touchdown to Chris Hogan, that was that kind of moment. First read wasn't there. Pocket's breaking down, has to get to his third read on the play and throws a touchdown. That's the kind of stuff I wanted to see from Jameis. But beyond that, you guys are going to ask me about my favorite throw of the week. And it's taken every bit of strength I have not to say that my favorite throw of the week was a throwaway. But that was what Jameis Winston did. There was a play on Sunday where there was nothing there. He was looking, and he simply threw the ball away. And in years past, Jameis Winston would have said, you know what? Mike Evans is down there somewhere. I'm going to throw it. Maybe he would have said, Callaway is down there somewhere on Sunday. I'm just going to throw it anyway, and it goes for an interception. And suddenly what looked like a great game from Jameis Winston starts to spiral out of control. The maturity on that play to just throw the ball away, and it's such a simple thing. But to see that from Winston, that was great to see. So, yeah, I'm all in. I am so excited to see Jameis Winston play this well in week one. I want to see it continue. They've got some tough defenses coming up. It's not always going to be easy, but I was very excited to see this from Jameis Winston.
You mentioned that play. I think he actually, when he talked to Peter King after the game and said that was his favorite throw of the game, the one that he threw away. Which kind of –
That's the Jameis we haven't seen. I mean, in the Jameis of years past, like I said, he would have said, you know what? I'm going to fit this into some tight window with three defenders draped on Nick O'Leary. That's who he would always do it in Florida State or Mike Evans in Tampa Bay. He simply threw the ball away. And something tells me Sean Payton on the grading sheet after that game, that play might have gotten the best grade from Sean Payton as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of people filling out their Coach of the Year ballots already for Sean Payton after 1 week based on some of the action that Jameis Winston had this weekend. That was the good. Let's head over to the bad a little bit now. Josh Allen against the Steelers threw the ball 50 times, only 270 yards. What do you make about that effort against a very good defense? But our expectations for Josh Allen are higher now.
Yeah, they're absolutely higher. They should be after the year he had last year. And this was kind of the thing that I was worried about. A lot of people were saying, the regression word, he's going to, come back to earth, whatever you want to say about Josh Allen, sort of taking a step back from the near MVP season he had a year ago. My concern, what I wanted to see was, okay, you go up against a defense that maybe figures you out, that maybe throws something at you, a zone coverage scheme or a man coverage scheme. You don't take a couple of weeks to figure it out. You figure it out in the course of a game. That didn't happen. It didn't quite happen. Now, maybe they have a bounce-back performance this week. Hopefully we see that. I think they play Miami. They saw a lot of man coverage. He had a lot of success against Miami last year, and so maybe he does. But I wanted to see Josh Allen, Brian Dable, be able to figure these things out as they went. Now, Pittsburgh has the sort of recipe, or at least they did on Sunday, for success in today's NFL, right? They get pressure with 4 up front, drop 7 into coverage. You can take away throwing lanes. You make life tough on the quarterback. You move him around. You pressure him. You get him off the spot. They had success doing that. Not many teams will be able to do that in today's NFL. So it won't always be as hard as it was on Sunday. But for where our expectations are with Josh Allen, we expected him to come out and say, okay, you're going to do that. I'll find a way. I'll hit guys that are open. I'll find soft spots in that zone coverage when you're dropping 7. When you play a man, I'm going to take advantage of those situations. He didn't do that on Sunday. And we expected the Josh Allen we saw last year to be able to figure that stuff out quickly. He didn't do it. And so now we see, okay, Last year it was like a 3 or 4 game stretch where he had to sort of figure things out. Now let's at least get it down to 1 week, bounce back with a strong performance against Miami.
Throw of the week, what is it?
Like I said, I really wanted to go with Jameis. I mean, I think the prettiest one, Kyler Murray, that like bucket shot, that rainbow that he had to Christian Kirk on that corner route where he like made a fadeaway throw with a guy on his feet. It's like 55 yards and it's like a rainbow. That was a really good throw, but I don't know how often, guys, we'll get a chance to talk about this team and this quarterback, so I'm going to do it. Tyrod Taylor and the Houston Texans. I did not see the Houston Texans win in this game. And, I thought they were going to struggle, but Tyrod Taylor looks great. They have a great game against Jacksonville, and he had a throw deep out route off of play action. It's a Brandon Cooks where they're showing the post route, and then he breaks out towards the sideline, threw it in an absolute shoebox right along the sideline. You get the toe tap from Brandon Cooks. It was absolutely gorgeous. You couldn't do it any better. And so I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity to mention some Tyrod Taylor, talk up Tyrod, who I've always had a soft spot for. I don't know if we'll get back to Tyrod Taylor and the Houston Texans in the next couple of weeks. So here in week 1, Tyrod Taylor, my throw of the week.
I mean, we were always waiting for a Justin Herbert throw, but Tyrod, I love it. Now, before we let you go, Mark, the other part of what we always ask you when NFL season begins, which quarterback matchup are you most excited about for week 2 in the NFL?
Yeah, and look, I'm very intrigued, I will say. You get Zach Wilson, you get Mac Jones. That's going to be fun to watch because we saw Mac Jones versus Tua last week. Now we're going to get Mac Jones and another AFC East sort of showdown. So that's what I'm very sort of excited to see. I'm oddly intrigued, guys. We get Taylor Heineke on Thursday Night Football. I've always had a soft spot for Taylor Heineke, so I'm excited to see that. But I think the one game that I'm really, really excited to see from sort of a quarterback in perspective is that game. You mentioned him, the Chargers, 4:25 Eastern. Dak Prescott, who looked great Thursday night. Justin Herbert, who I really like the way he played against Washington. Those are two of my favorite quarterbacks to watch. And so, when we get into that late day window on Sunday, that's the game my eyes will be on, when that one kicks off.
Mark, we always love it. We'll talk next Tuesday. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys. Have a great night.
There is Mark Schofield, USA Today, QB analyst, and does some great breakdowns on his YouTube page as well. Tyrod Taylor, was not expecting that, but I guess none of us were. The Jacksonville Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, hot shot, never lost a regular season game in his life, shows up week 1. A lot of questions about his coach and the preparedness of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they get blown out by the team that was pegged to lose 16 games this year, the Houston Texans. It might be a long year, and we might be out on Urban Meyer if they don't show some signs of promise pretty soon, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about who's the first head coach to go. Is Urban Meyer the first head coach to resign? And okay, I'm not trying to make fun of Urban Meyer, but the pressure has gotten to him a couple of times.
Yeah.
Right? And we saw it happen in college. There's a lot. I mean, it's not easy to deal with, right? I mean, if things go awry, that situation in Jacksonville bears watching.
Yeah, and remember, running your own program in college is entirely different than the pros. You're dealing with a different situation. You got to make sure you're ready to go with your OCs and your DCs and make sure your team is ready to go. But Trevor Lawrence, I know people were saying this guy hadn't lost, 3 interceptions. He's never had that in college. There were 6 drop passes in that game. His wide receivers did not give him any help. And he had the jitters. He was overthrowing guys. He made the wrong reads. That's expected in your first start, right? When you're touted as the single best prospect since Andrew Luck at the position, I'm sure there's going to be jitters. But help this guy out a little bit. Drop after drop after drop. I think he'll be okay. It's going to be a rough year for the Jags. But the Texans, how long does this last? 1 week? 2 weeks? 3 weeks? I'm still low on them. Come on. They played the Jags in week 1.
But you know what? I've always kind of had a soft spot for Tyrod Taylor, and I think he's remember, he would have started ahead of Justin Herbert last year if Dr. Nick with the Chargers didn't puncture his lung.
It's true. Good reference.
Starting this weekend, listen to the Fantasy Show for your chance to win a Dauber Hockey Platinum subscription and win your Fantasy Hockey League this season. Every Sunday from August 30th to September 19th, during the Fantasy Show, the announcers will name a current player and discuss their fantasy implications for the upcoming year. Listeners will have to text the player's name and boss or toss to 650-650 to enter. Standard text charges will apply. They can text in boss if they like the player or toss if you don't. Each week, we'll select one winner from the text line. So there it is. If you want to get some extra fantasy hockey help for this year, be listening on Sundays to the Fantasy Show. It is the People's Show coming up. Our Week 2 NFL Power Rankings and the matchups we're looking forward to in Week 2 as well. Sportsnet 650.